money, enough love, enough wisdom, I'm sure, enough caring to end the famines and wars. When enough is enough, then something must give. If we change how we think, we can change how we live.
And I will say that this is, sponsored by the Baha'i community, and as I said, I'm a Baha'i, so there's going to be some Baha'i stuff in this. But we could have easily done this from almost any religious background. We could have found things to support this. The first thing I want to say is that if you do think the world is changing in ways it never has been done before, you really aren't crazy. And some people will tell you that you're crazy if you believe that the world is really changing in ways that we haven't seen before in human history. That this is all just part of one big cycle, but it isn't. Things are changing in a much different way. And so I'll go on. This, through anthropology courses I've had in the past, has been argued for some time about how long that modern humans have been around. It's certainly been more than 200,000 years. Some estimates go higher than 270, 280,000. So pick a number, 240,000 years. Now, when you put that into perspective, really into perspective, who here knows how long the Old Kingdom in Egypt has been, how far that was in the past? That's just about 10,000 years ago. So when you think of people being around for 200,000 plus years, there's a lot of history. But one of the things, this premise that things are changing in a different way than what we've seen before, you probably can't see this graph, but at least through the history that we really have recorded, that there hasn't been that many of us, right? But it's absolutely breathtaking when you start to look at how this, let's see, I know there's a pointer here, but how this graph goes asymptotic, how it goes into this strong spiral upwards so quickly in such a short period of time. So if you want to prove to yourself we're living in different times, this is one way that you can find and see absolutely that things have changed. Has anybody ever heard of the book Future Shock?
Yes.
Yeah, right? It was really popular back in the 70s. It was really topical by Owen Toffler. But as you can see, or maybe you can't see, this graph is about, let's see if I can get the point of the word, human knowledge. And it's a little dated because it says that human knowledge, IBM said in 2020, that human knowledge has been doubling every 11 to 12 hours. Right? That's incredible. When you think of it, the whole body of human knowledge was, and that was in 2020, it's gone even faster now. So we've never had times like this. This is something completely new in the history of humanity, something we've never really seen before. And, this expansion of knowledge has such absolutely profound impact on the lives of everyone that's alive today. It's incredible. And in fact, this has enabled war and environmental damage at scales that were once unimaginable. And I'll say that during, probably almost everybody here, there's a few younger people, but remember, we really went through, in the period of the 1950s and 60s, a really great scare about whether we were going to go into nuclear war, right? And that was just incredible, for us. And we all know the story of what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in one way or another. But now, is this the scariest thing? To me, it's getting to be even scarier with these robotic drones. The Chinese and others are making little robots that are like dogs with guns on them that they can parachute into neighborhoods to kill people. So that kind of situation is incredible, that kind of situation. So I don't know which is scarier, nuclear war or what this AI and robotics technology is going to do to us. On the other hand, this is kind of a messy little thing, but because our technology and our knowledge has grown so much, we've gone from being able to just impact small urban areas or just pollute one river to where now we're polluting the entire world, right? So, and that's something new too. In human history, we didn't have the power to do that, but now we do. Here's a slide you can't read because it's not as big as being on the screen at a drive-in theater. But one of the things that people maybe don't know that one of the things in the Baha'i faith is that we have this list of terrible things that might happen before the world finally starts to change and people start to grow up and start to look at things differently. And if you go down the list, it's all kinds of things like transformation of human society, on and on. But at the very bottom, it talks about two things, and that's my topic for tonight, is the development of infernal engines of war and the contamination of the atmosphere of the earth. Now, where these things were outlined was sometime after 1863 and before 1880. So imagine that one of the things we've been warned about on this list, the very last on the list, was the contamination of the atmosphere, and next to the bottom was the development of infernal engines of war, which in the 1800s we didn't really have those kind of things. So this again points to a massive change that's happening in human life, in human society. We've been living in a geological age called, if I get close to that, that's really authoritarian. Anyway, called the Holocene. But it's a new way of looking at this is we're starting to talk about the Anthropocene, which is a new geologic age. And what this age is that the entire Earth is being impacted by humans. So we've moved from just the natural processes. Oh, good. I hope it's water. But, in the past times, the Earth, the planetary system, was really impacted by natural forces more than the forces of humanity. But our presence and our influence on nature, on the planet, has become so pervasive. We become so pervasive and so powerful that now we influence every corner of the Earth. There's nowhere that you can go on the Earth and not find the evidences of air pollution. If you go to Antarctica and look at the snow in Antarctica and do analysis of it, you'll see traces of industrial pollution. There's no place you can go. There's no place you can get away from it. Whether the highest mountain or the lowest part of the ocean, it's everywhere that's impacted by our actions. Now, before you get too tearful about that, there's a great opportunity in it, and I'll talk about that. So, for this period of time, in our life, you know, in this Anthropocene, this has probably been, you know, our go-to statement. That if stupidity got us into it, why can't it get us out of it? Right? You see that every day on the news. We're trying to do the same thing that we've done for years that have caused the problem to get us out of the problem. Right? I don't know if you agree with that, but it seems that you can at least somewhat, you can find examples, right? So, I'm going to try to talk about a couple of trends that I see, or I think that are important in the world. This is an exhaustive list, but it's a list of some. So what are some of the major trends that we're facing in this year, right? Well, war is certainly one. Environmental change, you know, and climate change in particular. Economic collapse and poverty. Agree, that's a trend in the world, right? We're seeing that all around us and the suffering that that's causing. Artificial intelligence. I'm not sure if there is artificial intelligence. If there is intelligence, it's just intelligence. Whether it's artificial, I don't know if that's true. But we're seeing that move at an incredible rate, right? Breakdown of institutions. Does anybody feel that there's breakdowns of institutions that are going around us? You know, that there's, I mean, I think most people are feeling that some institutions, maybe not all, but some people have a longer list and some shorter list, but that institutions are really starting to break down, whether it's our political institutions, whether it's our social institutions, whether it's our religious institutions, that there's breakdown in these. And we're in, a lot of you, I know at least the art folks are really been kind of working about this. Maybe you don't express it in this way, but really that's part of it. And then there's a huge movement towards authoritarianism and oligarchy, right? We all know what those words mean. Oligarchy. Oligarchy is the rule by the rich. The rich gaining so much power that they have so much influence over society, over our lives, that it's breathtaking. And that's really, I think most of us, well, we could do a whole thing on that. Food insecurity. That's a thing that we're all starting to see as a trend across many places in the world. Refugees. My word, how many people are worried about and refugees coming into countries? Whether, I don't care whether it's Europe or the United States, North America, South America, even Australia, right? This is something that people are worried about. And this is something that people don't talk about very much, but there's been a tremendous change in human history in the development of megacities, cities of at least 10 million people. And I probably don't have this completely right, but why not spin a tale when you're here, right? You know, I think in the 1930s, there was only one city in the world that had 10 million people. And now there's masses of cities that have 10 million people or more. Margaret and I were recently in Shanghai. And Shanghai has over 20 million people, 22 million to 26 million. There's so many they can't count them. And so when we're looking, it's a very compact city, you know, these big high-rise buildings. And I started to think, looking at them, how do they get water up in these big high-rise buildings and all these for over 20 million people? And I thought, how do you get electricity for over 20 million people in one city? And then I thought, which is, I don't want to scandalize you, how do you get rid of this sewage from 20 million people? You know, how are they handling all that? So this growth of these large cities is really something that's brand new in our history as a species. And so tonight, and you can't see it because this isn't a big enough screen, but but highlighted. I'm going to talk about war, environment, climate change, and the breakdown of institutions a little bit in this talk. So after all this stuff, I'm going to start getting into what I really wanted to talk to you about. So this is an interesting graph, and these are wars ranked by death toll from 1800 to 2011. And as you can see, or maybe you can't see because it's too small, World War II, there were about 21 million people that were killed in World War II. And that's not counting the people that died of starvation, the civilians that were killed. That's just counting the combatants that were killed. If you go down through this, you can see World War I was not very good either, 7.1 million. And then, all these other wars like Vietnam, which certainly affected me in my lifetime because, and maybe many of you, because there was, at least in the United States, we had a draft that we had to put up with. So, but anyway, so what's driven this? Really, when you start to think about it, it was the technology and the growth in human knowledge that allowed these two major worldwide wars. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is how much resource is being eaten up by this whole complex of things. Now, if you look, and you probably can't see, but Australia has spent, and this was during the 2026 budget process, $55.7 billion. So we're right behind Japan in spending. So if we work a little bit harder, we could beat Japan and spend more money than Japan. So, but, of course, the top of the list is the United States. And the United States is now, its new budget that they're trying to push in the United States is $1.2 trillion. Not this measly $895 billion, but $1.2 trillion. So if you think about this as a change in society, the amount of money that's being spent on these things is massive. Has anybody not heard that we're having a war with Iran? That there's a war between Israel and the United States and Iran? Has anybody not heard? No, I don't think anybody's saying that. So what have we learned from the current war between the USA, Israel, and Iran? Well, I probably don't have to read the rest of the slide, but I don't think we've learned very much. We're pretty much in ignorance about what we're doing. So Iran was characterized as a lesser power. And if you remember before this all started, if you've heard on the news, they were having protests because their economy was so bad in Iran. And talking with Pardeep, because he works in water issues, Iran was in a terrible situation with water. And I don't know if you've heard this, but the mayor of Tehran, which is about 11 million people, I think, in Tehran, or a little bit more. It's a pretty big city with that many people. They were telling people that they were going to have to evacuate the city because there was no drinking water left. And there was a number of other cities like Isfahan and that were having the same kind of situation. So this country that really people would have never guessed has been overwhelming Israel's and the United States air defenses with weapons that they've made themselves. Now, that's pretty significant when you stop to think about it, that a country that nobody counted on being as a high technology country has been able to make its own missiles, its own weapons, and defeat the most expensive funded military in the world and a country that's been given lots of money to defend itself. So, so what this war has been a worldwide economic disaster, which nobody counted on. I mean, there were some experts that kept warning about this, but that's happened. You know, and according to recent studies, Washington provided Israel $21.7 billion in military aid out of the American taxpayer's pocket over a 2-year period, but it only spent about $12.1 billion on the environment. Well, that's the budget of the federal EPA. So it's on par the amount of money that's been given to Israel as what the U.S. spends on the Environmental Protection Agency. Pretty amazing. So, and most experts are saying that if the U.S. were to put troops on the ground on Carg Island and other places, that they would be slaughtered almost instantly by the drones and the missiles that Iran has made itself. And if they land these troops inside any place in Iran for an on-the-ground mission, that they're most likely going to be killed quickly by those weapons that Iran itself, which is not spending hardly anything on them. They just shot down, if you heard on the news, a $300 or $400 million helicopter with a $35,000 drone. So that's interesting, isn't it? So, so if Iran can defeat the USA and Israel with things that it makes itself, could other countries do that? What do you think? So what this might tell us is, and this is a big jump, and you may have a question for me afterwards or want to debate this, but is it possible to think that the way that humanity has fought wars in the past now has become completely outdated? That we can't fight wars. Not only just not give up war, but it's impossible to fight wars in the way that we used to. And if that's the case, maybe wars become obsolete. Maybe what this is teaching us is that war itself is becoming obsolete and something that we can't, not only we can't do, we just can't do. We don't have the ability to do it. Because this technology has gone so far and so systemic throughout the body of mankind and the nations of mankind that we won't be able to do what we used to do in World War I and World War II. We won't be able to have those kind of wars. War and environmental damage are so linked that one causes the other, right? So we know that, I mean, everybody can think that when we're bombing cities and burning down cities and doing all this, that's causing environmental damage, not only damage to people, right? But the environment itself, the damage we're doing to the environment itself, is causing people to become more militarized. A good example is what's happened, in Africa, what we're seeing in Africa right now, where huge famines, food shortages, and that sort of thing, caused by what most experts are saying exacerbated by, at least, climate change, is causing more and more militarization, more and more conflicts. And in fact, the US military some years ago did a study and said that climate change was one of the greatest threats to humanity for causing more wars. So these two things are really linked. And if we are in this time called the Anthropocene, this geologic age of human dominance of the planet, well, we know that nature is now confronted with over 8 billion people, a little bit over 8 billion, I think it is right now, although some studies are saying the population is starting to drop a bit. And we're all burning stuff, right? We're in perfect unity as a species on burning fossil fuels in general. We're in perfect unity on that, you know? And we're all eating stuff. We're all using all kinds of stuff, plastics and you name it, and we're throwing all those things away into the ground, water, and the air. And as I said, there's no place on the planet where you can't find traces of this now. So, and we're also really warlike still. And, you know, we kind of view competition and dominance as the way to solve problems, right? I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, but if you think about it, that's been the way we've been trying to solve problems for ages. And we're still doing those same things. So, this is interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but the US military actually emits more CO2 than many nations. And you probably can't see it, but, you know, but here, what is this one? But you're talking about Sweden and New Zealand, that the US military is actually a huge emitter of carbon dioxide, of greenhouse gases. So again, you can see how these two things are linked together, if nothing else, by just emissions. Now, this is probably tried to even show at least all the people that are involved in art. But you can see that, you know, if you look at this is temperatures, right? And so you can see from 1800 all 19 to 2000, it does look like there's kind of a trend, doesn't it? I mean, you don't have to be a great statistician to see that there's some. Now, this isn't. This is coming from NOAA, National Atmospheric and Oceanographic Administration. So it's. You can pretty much think that these guys are somewhat credible, you know. so that. But you can also see that this is really following pretty closely an increase in carbon dioxide concentrations. Remember that thing about the pollution of the Earth's atmosphere? Remember that? So it isn't just pollution of a local city's atmosphere, it's the Earth's atmosphere. So usually these measurements are taken at Mauna Loa and in Hawaii and other places, but you can see the trend has really gone up, and I think we're now at about 450 parts, you know, carbon dioxide, you know, parts per, I guess it's parts per billion, you know, so, or million. So, and so what does that do for us here? Well, in 2025, in February, Western Australia had, what does it say, it was 24 hours, at the top 15 hottest places on Earth. That should be pretty concerning to us, really, that we have the hottest places. And it's a little bit hard to see, I know, but you can see this is 45 degrees, and all these really, it isn't in these towns, but this, if you can see this graph a little bit better, what it would, you'd see these places that are really dark black. And those are the places where it was over 40 and 45 degrees. That's getting pretty warm, friends. That's getting pretty uncomfortable, right? So then, you know, it's pretty clear in the data that we have that the source, or the frequency of extreme heat events, is just rising and rising. So in the data, of course, there's this variation where some years are cooler than other years, but on average, the trend is pretty clear. And this isn't just guesswork, this is actual data. So this is the actual data of what's happening. These things, this change in technology, this change in the population, this change in our emissions, all those sorts of things, are all coalescing into one big movement of the planet in a direction. There's a direction to all of this. So I guess the thing I would ask you all to think about, is this the direction you really want to go? And what does this direction mean for the next 10 years, 20 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years? What does this direction really mean? So, we know that climate change is linked to freshwater shortage. In fact, Pradeep and I were just talking about this, and Sholay and Margaret on the way over. But it's also, which probably all of you know, the leading cause of death from extreme weather. That's hurricanes and tornadoes and floods and all that sort of thing. What's the leading cause of death? Human death? It's heat related. So increasing the heat of the planet, increasing the extremes of heat are what's driving a lot of increase in deaths, in waterborne diseases, illnesses, spread of infectious diseases, injuries and illnesses due to these. And actually, I spent a lot of my life working on air pollution from different mining operations and from oil fields and that sort of thing. And one of the things that people don't realize, that air pollution from traffic or from any other source, the health effects of that is exacerbated by the temperature of the atmosphere, the air around you. I think in the United States, they're saying that, if I'm remembering correctly, and they're taking a video of it, so you'll be able to look at it perhaps and see how off base I am sometimes, but it's something like 170,000 people they think die from air pollution every year in the United States. There's a Baha'i quote here that basically, well, it's hard to read on this screen, but basically it tells us that the way to move towards the future is we have to start looking at not just our own benefit, but the benefit of all humanity at one time. And that's a little bit hard for us to actually sometimes internalize. It sounds like a nice thing to say, but really internalizing that and thinking about how that directs your actions and how you expect your institutions and your community to act is something that's deeper. So I'll go on from this. This is interesting and again, hard to read that. So 1.5 degrees versus 2 degrees centigrade. It doesn't look likely to me, friends, that we're going to have 1.5 degrees, that we're going to stop at that. And it doesn't look likely to me that we're going to stop at 2 degrees. We're more likely to have a 3-degree change in our average temperature across the planet. This is really concerning. This is fantastically concerning. Some of us, like me, are old enough that I won't live to see all the consequences. But there are people alive today that will start seeing these consequences, and certainly all of you that have children and grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, will see some incredible things. And so this was a nice little graph done by the World Wildlife Fund. I'll just point out one thing. So it says, if at 1.5 degrees, 9% of the world's population, 700 million people, will be expected to have extreme heat waves at least once every 20 years. And if it goes to 2 degrees, 28%, 2 billion people, will have that occur. So If we were to go through everything on this, we'd be here indeed for 3 hours talking about that. So I won't do that, but I'll just say you can see that the difference between half a degree makes an incredible, incredible impact expressed in the world, worldwide. I'm not going to leave you, hopefully, without any hope. This has been pretty depressing, hasn't it, what I've just said? And I'm not trying to depress everyone. But, you know, to make sense of these trends, there's sort of two intellectual models that I find really kind of compelling. And not just in Baha'i literature, but it's in other literature too. And so I'm going to express them in a simple way, and that is integration and disintegration as a framework for understanding major trends. So is there some way that we can understand these major trends in the world that are going on, like AI, like this war that we're having, like the increasing growth of authoritarianism and oligarchy? Is there a way that we can understand that? And I want to talk about three protagonists in this, which is maybe something you've not thought about, but maybe something you have thought about. And I know some of the Baha'is in the room have thought about this, but maybe not quite in this way. Or maybe you have, but we'll see. So, integration and disintegration. Well, these are sort of two opposing forces. They're two opposing forces. And they're not opposing in the way that you might think of them just butting heads. They're competing for the direction that mankind's going to go in the future. Right? And so these are really an historical process of one mode of civilization, see if I can get the little point, failing, while another arises to replace it. Now maybe an example that we can know from history is the Renaissance. How that changed. It was like the old society was being challenged by a new society that was coming up. Makes sense to you at all? You know, that you can think about that, right? And so, you know, disintegration is the process of the old style of civilization failing and being replaced. So, during the Renaissance, or during these periods in human history where changes were occurring, there was an old style of the way things were being done replaced by a new style. And this was really seen in the way that science was looked at as a human endeavor. So that's another great example where integration is a process of a new sort of style of civilization is arising to replace the old. And each of these processes are necessary, and I would put to you that they're unstoppable. That these processes, once they've started, can't be stopped. You know, one has to replace the other, and that's the crisis point that we're at in human society as to which way we're going to go. With a different kind of society, or are we going to keep the old society that's been failing us? We've seen this kind of viewpoint of disintegration. So the disintegration viewpoint I would put to you is a way of protecting or trying to keep the old civilization, the old way of doing business in place. And even I have trouble reading all this. But, you know, one of the things that you'll see on the news, have you ever heard anybody's really expressing this, maybe not so overtly, but boy, if we could just go back to the past, the way things were in the past, if we could just go back and not have all this new stuff, you know, back in the past, things were really great. Well, of course, when you look at it, things weren't that great in the past, but it's been romanticized, right? You know, and that there's another thing that we don't talk about so much, but I'll say that, you know, in religion, in some religious circles, there's a feeling that if we just pray enough, God will fix everything, and we don't have to do anything. Have you heard that? I mean, okay, you know, I'm not trying to really hammer anybody on that, but there is that kind of viewpoint that if we just pray enough, some miracle will happen and everything will be fixed for us. And we'll go back to some pastoral time in human history, maybe a mythical time, really. And then there's another viewpoint in this. It's not our fault. It's the fault of somebody else. You know, we didn't really cause this. It was somebody else caused this. They pushed this on us. You know, it's, you know, and we're too few, and we're too weak, and we're too powerless. We can't do anything about any of this stuff, right? And then, you know, it's all just politics, so we can't get involved. And then in some places where this is ending up to is, let's just give. Let's just get those people that have caused this on us. Let's just give it. You know, and you can see that in countries where refugees and minorities and others are being persecuted by groups, right? So this viewpoint would take us back to some time that never existed, right? It would take us back to a point that we've never had that before. And as you can see, the little guy on the board is saying in school, I will not act primitive in class, right? But you know, there is no going back to a simpler time. You know, so I would say that this disintegration viewpoint is not a positive way for us to behave or to think. And from the Baha'i writings, we're told that that which was applicable in past times is no longer suitable. That we have to look and see that we have to change and come up with solutions for the times in which we live, not the times of the past, and expect that everything that we did in the past could just fix everything in the future. So I'm sorry that you can't read this, because it's a very nice quote, but I guess what we could do is we could give this, well, maybe on the video, these will all be clear for everybody to see. He's holding up his thumb saying, yeah, it's going to be easy. Okay. So there's another viewpoint, which is, I think, more productive, and that's the integration. That, you know, we're not powerless. We can fix things. We can move things in the right direction, right? Now, you know, we can keep moving things forward if we work and try. And maybe there's even a religious aspect to this, is that if we all work together, whatever our faith background, whatever our belief, but look for what's common between us, what things we share, that we can start to become unified in a way that's productive. That's a big ask, I know, because we've laid years and years of theology on ourselves sometimes that lead to our actually alienation. But those things can be dropped, I think, and we can find a way forward where we're all together. And then, let's see what else. Can I even read this? You know, the other thing about this integration viewpoint, I think, which is this viewpoint of a new civilization arising while the old civilization is kind of waning, you know, one's waxing and one's waning, is that, you know, we cause these problems. The problems that we have are not caused by space aliens, right? They're not caused by, perhaps, I don't know what you want to say, you know, but we cause these problems. We take responsibility for the problems that we have. Pollution didn't come from just nowhere, it came from us. War didn't come from just nowhere, it came from us. And if we created it, shouldn't we have the power to change it? Doesn't that make sense that we would? So taking that viewpoint, we can move on and move in a positive way and expect and demand that our institutions actually embody this, that they take responsibility for what we've done, and they take the viewpoint that because we've taken the responsibility, we can change things. So, what did I say here? So it's really, even I can't read these lines. It's if we get unified, we can get unified to act. And here's buzzwords for the Baha'is in the room: community building, right? We can build communities around things, and we can have a planet, if we wanted, where we see ourselves as one planet and one people. We don't have to see ourselves as a collection of competing nations or a collection of competing, ethnicities or competing cultures. We can see ourselves as cooperative, as something that adds together greater than the pieces. I started thinking some time back about this, that if we're in the Anthropocene, if this is really true, we're in the age of where mankind has so affected the planet that we're in a geographic age that's different, then we're not just part of nature. We have a responsibility in nature. And so I thought a nice little graphic would be Atlas holding up the world. That Atlas, that old myth about Atlas, that's our position right now, is to hold up the world. So that's the responsibility of every one of us, right? And so this is a nice little quote that you can, even I can read this one. It says, "We cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world, his inner life molds the environment, and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one act upon the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is a result of these mutual reactions." Sounds highfalutin, but when you start to think about it, we're not separated from the world. And if we take into consideration the environment impacts that war causes, we see that we can't be separated from that. We can't be separated. This is our lot. We're on one planet. We're one people. And we're going to have to learn that this is one of the fundamental truths of the age in which we live. So, people are losing faith in institutions. Remember, I was going to talk about institutions too. And why are they losing faith? Because people are seeing that the institutions that we have aren't actually serving us in the way that we hoped and established them for. I see a few people shaking their heads. That sounds a little bit pessimistic, perhaps. But if you think about it, that seems to be a truth of this day, that people more and more are losing faith in every kind of institution. I think what we have to look at, or at least I would say that, that most of the Baha'is feel, and I think lots of other people, because I've been to all kinds of different Christian groups and Buddhist groups and, you name it, and Muslim groups and this, and talking with them, and almost everybody is seeing that the entire enterprise of civilization is a spiritual process. So it's involving the progressive awakening of humanity's moral and creative capacities. This is something that people will tell you, if you listen to the media that's going around now, and you listen to some of our politicians and some other people, that it's not a spiritual process. It's only a cold kind of intellectual process. It's only a mechanical process. But if we think about the process of civilization changing, of growing, that there's a spiritual basis for it too. And that's spiritual in the broadest sense, not just spiritual in the sense of, I don't know what we might say, just dogma, but it's in the very basic part of the human spirit that if we're going to have a civilization, we have to have a spiritual process that goes along with it, a way of being able to not only interact with ourselves, but interact with the infinite and face the infinite. That this incredible planet that we have, an incredible universe that we live in, we can't just look at this as a clockwork. We have to look at it as something deeper and meaningful for us, otherwise our lives become hollow. So, I told you that there was going to be some sort of context for action. And there's a thing that's been going around, at least in the Baha'i community, about 3 protagonists. And this is a pretty simple kind of a concept, that it takes 3 levels of people to be able to make progress. And so these 3 levels, these protagonists, and it says a protagonist is, where am I going here? A protagonist is a noun meaning principal character in a fictional work. It can also be used more broadly to refer to the main participants in a real life event. So there are 3 levels of people or things that need to interact, 3 protagonists that have to interact if we want to change the environment, if we want to change the course of human history. And that is the individual, the community, and institutions. And they all must act together responsibly. And I put a little shocking note here. We're getting close to the end. I know you've probably been ready for a cup of tea or anything, just make me stop, but here we go. There's been people, I've heard a lot of people that just say, well, if we change human nature, if we change the way people act, everything will be great. Or, if we just change the way the politicians act, everything will be great. I put to you that it takes something more, that this 3 protagonists has a lot of really power in it. And so the reason it does is because individuals, institutions, and community. So we've got an example of technology going off right now. But anyway, so, I put to you that this concept has a lot of power, and especially for those of you in ARC and other things that are planning on actions. Really when you understand that it takes the actions of individuals, institutions, and community, but when those 3 things overlap, those 3 protagonists, their interests and their strengths and their resources overlap, that's where we get the power for change. It's not just working on institutions or working on community or individual change. It has to be those 3 things together to move things forward. So, you could see that if I read all this stuff, you'd be here for a long, long time. And so, I'll go on. Does this make any sense to folks?
Yeah.
When you start to think of it, in some ways, when I ran into this concept, I was kind of surprised. But it's something that some of us know intuitively, and some of us have never thought about in this way objectively. So, you're not crazy if you think the world is changing in ways that we've never seen before. And some people might tell you that you're crazy if you're thinking this, but you're not, because it's absolutely changing in ways we've never seen before. There's a great little thing that the Baha'i International community has put out called One Planet, One Habitation. And I think the Baha'is can get you a copy of this, or you can find it online. And this is well worth a good read. And it talks about how we start addressing environmental issues using this idea of three protagonists and using this idea of coming to a better form of unity about things. And this is the last slide that, again, you can't read very well. But, so I'll just synopsize it. In about, I guess it was about probably 1870s, that this was written in the Baha'i scriptures. And what it says is that the time will come when there will be a convention of all the nations of the world. And they will come to a treaty that sets the boundaries of all nations, that makes it illegal for one nation to sell arms beyond its borders. If you think about that, no more big arms industries in countries like the US sending $21 billion in 2 years of arms to Israel. No more of that. And that the whole world would enter into a thing which scholars call collective security. And what collective security means is that one nation, if it arises to be an aggressor to another nation, the whole world would rise up and free the people of that nation from the aggressor government that it has. So this would be a worldwide treaty. And this treaty would be taught from kindergarten to grade school to high school to university. And it would be seen as one of the bases for human morality. That no nation can be aggressor against another nation. And this sounds like pie in the sky. This could never happen. But you've heard of the United Nations. Everybody's heard of that. But before the United Nations, there was the League of Nations, right? And where the League of Nations came from was the president that started it, and I'll have to think of his name. Anyway, Hoover, I think it was. And he basically started the League of Nations, and where he got the idea was his daughter was Baha'i, and gave him this outline. And he used this as the basis for making this first attempt at a United Nations. Now we know the United Nations right now is flawed, right? It's terribly flawed, especially in the Security Council, where there's 5 nations that have the absolute power to veto any action that the United Nations makes towards bringing peace, basically. So this is something that I think not only Baha'is, but all of mankind, all people, whatever religious background or no religious background can think about, would we be better off with such a treaty? How would the world civilization be if we had this sort of treaty? If it were taught as a basis of morality from kindergarten up through university, what a difference would that make? And it would involve not only individuals, but communities and institutions, those 3 protagonists. So, what are conclusions? War and environmental crisis are linked. Right? I hope I've maybe given you some thoughts about that. You know, we're in a period unlike we've ever had before in human history. We're in the Anthropocene, which is a different geological age, perhaps, than we've ever been in. It will take a systematic change, a systemic change in human societies, institutions to get us out of the mess we're in. And oligarchy won't do it, and authoritarianism won't do it. It's got to be something else. So one world united for human welfare, not united for economy, not united for transportation of goods, but for the welfare of all humans. And it will take the collective efforts of these three protagonists, not just one, not just politicians, not just government institutions, but it will take individuals, community, and institutions. And this idea of collective security is a time that it's an idea that we have to have now. At least in my opinion, that if we don't move towards that, we're going to cause much more trouble and have much more problems. Questions or thoughts on this? Yeah.
Do you think it's had a great catastrophe, war and environment, and many people dying before people start doing something, getting together? A huge
That's a really, really significant question, and I would dodge it if I could. So I wouldn't answer it, but I'll give you what my answer is. You know, I think we're involved in a huge capacity. Right now, you know, there was this whole thing about, you probably all heard about, you know, putting a frog in a pot of water and then turning the water on and, you know, right? And I think the crisis we're in right now is so significant. It's so significant. And it's impacting so many places across the world that we're actually in a huge calamity right now. You know, and for some people, this is so acute, especially in places in Africa and in Asia, that this, and in South America, that some of these crises, and well, you know, of course, the islands and the Pacific and the Atlantic, that they're in this absolute crisis right now. So if you're waiting for something even worse, God help us all. That's all I can say. So.
I agree with you that a lot of what you're saying for me is to change how we live, we have to change how we think. That's the first thing. So how do we do that when from the day we're born, the way we're educated, is we're trained to think there's not enough to meet the needs of everyone. So it's up to us to draw to ourselves a disproportionate share of the world's resources so that we can have a good life, but it's probably at the expense of other people who live in poverty. So that's the scarcity principle. We're trained from day one to live under that principle. Contrary to that is the abundance principle. So what interests me is the transition in thinking from thinking scarcity to abundance. And abundance doesn't mean the Earth's resources are unlimited. It means we have more equality, we share what we have, we don't have extremes of wealth. So what interests me is that transition.
Yeah.
And it's a big transition, it's a big conversation, but I really like your thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's fair enough. You know, and it hits on this whole idea of integration and disintegration, right? You know, and there are people that can't accept that the way that society has been running, well, basically, I mean, I think that you can have a good argument that the society, the structure of society we've had since the Middle Ages. It's really the same, and that's this idea of there isn't enough. There's enough resources, and the resources that we do have should go to the more deserving, you know? And normally the people that argue this put themselves in the category of the more deserving, right? you know, and probably probably every one of us in this room, for some people, would not be in that category of the deserving, right? You know, so we see these people that are getting to be, well, a trillionaire, for example, you know, that, I won't name him, but you know, so there is that. And then there's this idea of integration of a new society that's being raised up. And really the way that I think, one of the ways that we can change our thinking on this is to really look at this objectively. You know, do we have the technology that we could stop burning fossil fuels? Do we have the technology?
Yeah.
Well, you know, a lot of people that look at this would say, yeah, we've got the technology, but we don't have the will to do it. We don't have the thinking to do it. Do we have the technology that we could start feeding, you know, all the people in the world? I don't know if you've, there's been all kinds of fantastic things about, you know, vertical farming. Would you have heard about that? You know, there's a technology called precision fermentation. Have you heard about that? What they've done is they've been able, and this, I don't know if it's really on sale, but it was supposed to be, they've been able to create milk using, actually cow's milk, using a fermentation process, a kind of a yeast, to create milk, using the same technology that people use for brewing beer. And it uses 100 times less water than a dairy farm. And I think it's 1,000 times less energy than a dairy farm. And it can be deployed anywhere in any sort of climate situation and the transport of milk. And they can make milk. There's also, in fact, I worked on this a little bit, cell culturing, where they're trying to grow meat in vats, which that sounds pretty scary, doesn't it? But, you know, but they're working on this. I saw where they've taken a feather from a chicken and they've grown out of that in cell culturing, a kind of culture, they grew chicken meat from cells from this feather they took from the chicken. And so they had a picnic where they were eating chicken nuggets, and they invited the chicken that they'd taken the feather from to grow. So, you know, is that meat or is that something else? I don't know. I mean, but, so those are extreme examples. Those are extreme examples. But, you know, we waste so much food and we have such an inefficient distribution system for food that even just those kind of changes, which would take more of a unified viewpoint, this viewpoint of let's do what's right for all people, let's do what's right for humanity. And I know some people say that we're intrinsically warlike, we're intrinsically greedy, we're intrinsically this. But I personally believe that education is the way that we get out of this. That we actually change the thinking of people because we educate people to think differently. You know, and you know, I think that people actually, in general, want to be reasonable. I have enough faith in humanity that I think we want to be reasonable, but we've not had the education to really understand the situation and the education to understand what we could do if we wanted to.
Thank you.
And education is the basis of it all. I mean, and what is true education? I mean, it's like we were talking, it needs a spiritual basis. It needs for you to think of your brother as the same as yourself, you know, someone in Sudan is the same as you, he's your brother or sister. It's this changing the way you think, to think that we're all one. We're all one people. We all want happiness and for our children to grow up, you know. It's having this changing the thinking with education.
I couldn't have said it better than that. That's absolutely right. And think of it, that if we had a treaty that outlawed war, and that treaty was made so that it was for the benefit of all mankind, and it was taught from kindergarten on out through university, how would this damage us, friends? How would this damage us to have something like that? Wouldn't that really help us move forward? It looks like I'm getting hold on. Thank you all.
Take what they want.